What are you doing? Just thinking about how Sunderland are possibly the best team in League One. That might be the stupidest thing I've heard in a long time. So, you draw 1 against Bristol Rovers. Then, everything's negative. Then you win last weekend against Oxford. And now, suddenly, Sunderland are the best team in League One. Heck, guy, I've been thinking about it for a little while, and I think that, Sunderland probably are the best team in League One. I think this could be stupider than my hat. Well, fortunately, Hat Guy, I have the stats to prove it. Hello and welcome to my Peterborough United preview, which also has the added story that Sunderland are the best team in League One. Now, of course, being the best team in League One is subjective, so you could immediately be like, nah, not true. But I read a great article on Roker Report this week, and I will put the link in the description, that basically showed that over the first 2 games of the season, Sunderland have been the best team so far. That article essentially broke down every team start of the season, looked at all the raw data that said that Sunderland had overall performed the best and were top of what would be a projected league table over the course of the season. Now, of course, we've only played 2 games. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and of course, football is not won on spreadsheets. However, you can take a lot of information from spreadsheets that can make you feel better or worse about your team. If you remember the 2018-19 season, Sunderland were doing well, but the data suggested that they were going to tail off, and that's what happened. So while I don't think data is necessarily going to show exactly what's going to happen, I think it can have a larger sort of inclination of what will happen down the road. So let's begin. Let's talk about what this data actually is. I'm going to put a table here, and that will go through all the factors that are taken into consideration when coming up with the overall graph that decides whether or not a team is going to be good or not. Essentially, if the defensive stats are red, that is good. If the attacking stats are green, that is good. And if there's a lot of black around in the middle of the circle, that is also very good. If you see a lot of grey and white on there, that is not good. We don't want that. That would suggest that you are not doing very well. So let's look at the data from Sunderland's first 2 games of the season. As you can see, it is a largely green and red graph. There's lots of black in the middle, and that is showing that Sunderland are doing well pretty much all over the park, which means overall they've had a very good start of the season in terms of the data. And just to give you an idea of how well Sunderland are performing, I'm going to put now the 2 charts of Sunderland over the last 2 seasons prior to this in League One. So what you'll see here is the promotion season under Jack Ross is not very good at all. There's not much green or red on there, which suggests that we were probably about where we finished. There's plenty of black in there, which means that we were good, we just weren't really the best in any department whatsoever. Last season, however, defensively we were pretty strong. Just attackingly, we struggled a lot. If you watch the football, so did I. So we can already see that the data from the last 2 seasons prior to this one is worse than the data from this season, and that shows basically that Sunderland are playing better through the opening 2 games than what they did over a 46-game season, or whatever we played last year, 37-game season. So now we can see what Sunderland have done. I'm going to put a comparison now between Sunderland and other teams in League One. Ipswich are currently projected to finish 2nd using this data method, and that is largely because they probably shouldn't have scored the amount of goals they have this season. They are probably overperforming what you'd expect over the course of a 46-game season. But largely their metrics are good, and you would expect, as every fan would expect, Ipswich would be there or thereabouts come the end of the season. I think Blackpool in 3rd place, who just on the screen now, it's not again surprising to see them doing so well. I think people thought that they did good business this summer. The only department they're faltering in is the fact they haven't been taking their chances well enough. If they do start scoring goals at the rate that's expected, then they're going to be a very big threat this season. The problem with Blackpool is whether or not they have a goal-scoring problem, i.e. they don't have the finishers, or if it's just down to luck, and luck can play a big part in football. The rest of the League One sides are now going to be listed here, who would be in the top 6. As you can see, Hull, MK Dons and Peterborough are on that list. They're showing inconsistencies, i.e. they are good at some things but they're not very good at other things. Of course, it's a 2-game sample, however it gives you an indication of where their strengths and weaknesses are. And if you compare that to Sunderland's data, Sunderland are pretty much green and red all around, which means that they're doing well at everything, whereas these sides aren't necessarily showing that. So to kind of give you an idea of what this table really means, I'm going to put up the stats for previous promoted sides. We'll go from the last full season, because obviously last year was a disaster, as you know, being a Sunderland fan, that it was decided on points per game. Luton and Barnsley were promoted in the 2018-19 season. That's the year, of course, we lost in the playoff final. They showed that year that they were in pretty much the top two for every single thing. You can see it on the chart here. Everything is green and red and lots of black in the middle. That means that they were probably the two best sides, and I think if you watched League One that season, you probably wouldn't have disagreed with that. They were the most consistent over the course of the season, which is why they got promoted. Wigan and Blackburn in the 2017-18 season were promoted, and they again were phenomenal. They were by far the two best sides that year. It's no surprise looking at the graph that they both, I think, nigh on got 100 points that season. So you can see how the data sort of shows if you're all green and red, you've got a very good chance of getting promoted. Interestingly, the year before that, 2017-18, Sheffield United got promoted. Unbelievable to think that they were in League One that season, considering they're now in their second season in the Premier League. But Sheffield United were promoted with largely green and red. No surprise there. However, Phil Parkinson's Bolton were also promoted, and if you look at their data, they didn't do very well at all, really. There's not much green, not much red, but there is a lot of black. That suggests that they were just a solid team all round, but they didn't really excel in any one department. So to kind of summarise, yes, it's a 2-game sample, but I just wanted to kind of give it an overview. I saw that article and I spoke to the guy who wrote it. He sent me over the data because I thought it was just interesting to see how Sunderland are performing over the first 2 games. There was a lot of fury after the Bristol Rovers match, myself included. And I want to kind of shed some light on actually the positivity behind the performances, whether or not it looks like it on the pitch. Sometimes the data suggests that we are actually playing quite well. I think it's obvious as well to fans that defensively we are probably going to be the strongest, if not the second strongest team this season. It's just whether or not we're going to get goals into the final third, and I think that's a problem that will basically decide whether we get promoted this season or not. Anyways, onto the game this weekend, because we are playing, and football is not won on spreadsheets and in data. Yes, we are playing Peterborough United at the Stadium of Light. And I suppose there are lots of questions to ask, because while we have played okay in the first 2 games of the season, we played well, certainly in the second half last week against Oxford, there's still questions as to how we will approach this game. Will Phil Parkinson make a change in central midfield? With the absence, potentially, of Max Power, who is injured, what will he do in that department? That's a big question. And I think probably a larger question than that is, what will Phil Parkinson do with the strike force? Because, he's played 4 strikers so far this season, whether or not substitutes or starting. You just don't know what he's going to do. We don't know what our best strike force is this season. And will this weekend give us an indication going forward of who he thinks is going to be his best striker? Or is it a case of playing them until he finds one that starts hitting a little bit of form and gets a little bit hot and starts scoring? Or will Parkinson just keep things the same from last weekend? Will he line up with Nye on the same 11 if he can? That wouldn't surprise me, because in all fairness, defensively we look pretty sound in the first half at Oxford. It's whether or not he thinks he has the substitutions to turn the game in our favour, which might be his approach. He also has to think, why not just attack Peterborough like we did at Oxford in the second half? That would be the thing I'd do, because that clearly worked. That was the best 45 minutes of football we've seen Sunderland play in a long time. That just makes sense. I think the questions are generally around Peterborough's defence, so if we just hit them hard, attack them, surely we'll get results. And I think that leads to the final point. Will we actually play a first half which can inspire the team to get 3 points? Will we attack from the off? Will we be out of sight? Maybe not out of sight, but will we get a goal in the first half that gives us a good chance and a good foundation to win the game? And I think Phil Parkinson, while the win last week was very good, this weekend's a good way of him backing up, himself and what he's trying to do here. Because if we can get a win this weekend and look as good as we did in the second half at Oxford, I don't think many fans are really going to be, talking negative about him. Essentially, that's just what Phil Parkinson has to do. He has to get results, and ideally he needs performances to go with that. So, Peterborough United, well, last weekend they beat Fleetwood 2-1. They scored 2 late goals. And of course, every Sunderland fan will just look at that with a little bit of humour, because Joey Barton is, of course, the manager of Fleetwood, and I can only imagine how upset he was at conceding them 2 late goals. They've got some interesting players this summer. Of course, we know that they've lost players, but bringing in Johnson Clark-Harris, who's kind of been a thorn in our side, will be interesting. We know how physical he is, and we know how difficult a player he is to deal with. Sammy Smodix as well is an interesting addition to the Peterborough team and kind of fits into what they like to do, bringing in creative players. And Reece Brown also looks like a strong addition. So I think this Peterborough team, probably not as strong as they were last season, but they're still a very good side. You also have to factor in the loss of Ivan Toney. He scored 40 goals for Peterborough over the last couple of seasons, and if you think about how many goals that is, Sunderland strikers who weren't named Josh Maja only scored 21 goals, not including penalties. So Ivan Toney is essentially double our strike force of the last 2 seasons. So to summarise this video, Sunderland, are they the best team in League One? That's only decided on the pitch, but it's interesting to look at the data behind sort of the performances so far this season. This weekend needs to be a Sunderland win. A win this weekend would really set us up for the season very nicely. 7 points from 9, and we've had a difficult start having played Oxford and Peterborough. Obviously the Bristol Rovers game was a disappointment, but overall we probably should have won that with the chances we made. But I think overall we should be encouraged as a fan base that the underlying data is very positive for us, and that should leave us in good stead for the season ahead. However, we do also know that Sunderland are very capable of laying a stinky out on that pitch on Saturday and sending us home deflated. But overall, I'm optimistic. I think we've got a good chance this weekend. I think we should beat Peterborough, and I think that I'm going to be tuning in that game with a very positive attitude. So, thanks for watching today's video. Please subscribe, like it if you liked it, comment if you think that I'm talking nonsense, share it with your friends. I'd really appreciate that as well, but thanks for watching.